Home Minister Amit Shah, who is in Manipur today, made an outreach to every community in the state. After meeting top officials and cabinet ministers, the Home Minister met leaders and women of the Meiteis community to understand their take on the crisis. After this, the Home Minister left for the hill district of Churachandpur, where he met with leaders of the kukie community in an attempt to promote dialogue between the two. This is an important 360-degree outreach from the Home Minister as violence continues to be reported from the state. It's important to hear the communities out and try and reach peace through dialogue. Joining us on the broadcast are Major General Sudhakarji, he's a defense expert, Khan Swan Housing, professor at the University of Hyderabad also joins us, and also on the broadcast with us, Suprangshu Pratim Samras, research scholar, he joins us live from Guwahati. If I could come to you first, Mr. Housing, there has been, of course, this extreme distrust between the two communities, and we've seen that boil over in the past 1 month. How do you view this visit by the Home Minister, and do you think this is the necessary first step, at least, for long-lasting peace in the state?
Thank you for having me. I do think that this is a very belated, though very disappointing visit by the Home Minister, because it came after 25 days of the outbreak of violence in Manipur. But I think despite all the misgivings about the center's non-interestedness in the affairs of Manipur, because it comes although late in the day, it is a very welcome step. But I think some of the important feelers that come from the ground is also quite disappointing, because the Home Minister seems to flag this proposal to the parties involved that they have to wait for another 15 days, which essentially, in effect, brings to the drawing board, the very offensive nature of these targeted killings in the hills. And until and unless presidential rule is immediately imposed, Armed Forces Special Powers Act reimposed in the valley areas, these targeted killings, offensive strike of the hill communities would continue, which eventually would lead to retaliatory defensive attacks against the Meiteis community. Given that the state law and order machinery has completely lost trust as well as legitimacy in the hill areas, I think this is not advisable at this point of time to continue with the political dispensation of the day. Therefore, I think that until and unless this trust deficit is breached by imposing president rule immediately, until a semblance of law and order stability is restored, I think things can really turn out to be very, very bad.
Right. So we were joined by Ramkau Kipken. He's a professor at IIT Guwahati, and we were talking about development a bit earlier, sir. Mr. Housing, do you think that he was telling us that how development in the state is uneven, and most of it which is happening is concentrated in the valley area closer to Imphal and not so much in the hill areas? Do you think that uneven development has also sort of led to this distrust, besides the land issues, besides issues of the ST quota, etc.?
Yeah, certainly. In fact, I have worked very extensively on these areas. In fact, way back in 2009, I have written a chapter on the, glaring disparities between the hills and the valley in my chapter that was published in Oxford University Press, edited by Sanjeev Barua, one of the leading scholars on Northeast India, where I pointed out a very glaring disparities in terms of reservation of positions. Remember that in the state of Manipur, there are local adjustments when it comes to both central as well as state, employment opportunities. The scheduled tribe communities are supposed to have 34% reservation, both in the state as well as the central government. But if you really look at the statistics available across departments, you'd hardly find that data are scarce in the first place. And wherever data could be generated, you'll find that in none of the departments, half of the quotas that are stipulated for the scheduled tribes are filled. And my research demonstrates, for example, that there is this awful democracy deficit, as it were, because the hill tribes were not given accommodated for the constitutional mandate within which they are sought to be accommodated. And look at the major developmental infrastructure in Manipur. You'll find that all the prestigious institutions, whether it is Polytechnic Institute, whether it is Central Institute established through, the direct funding of Northeastern Council, NITs, RIMS, Regional Institute of Medical Science, or any Central Agricultural Universities, you name it, Sports Authority of India, despite the fact that for example, Churachandpur or Senapati or Kangpokpi, which are just on the plateau, on the foothills, which is equally as flat as the Imphal Valley areas are, there are no excuse whatsoever justifiable in terms of shifting of these infrastructural provisions. And in fact, when the National Games was organized sometime in 2005, remember that, one of the marathon trek in effect started from Imphal and make a turn around, what is now the epicenter of the violence in May 3, which suggests that there is apparent imaginary boundary drawn between the hills and the valleys in terms of the discomfort as well as unwillingness on the part of the political dispensation in the valley areas to climb up to the hills. And had it not been for this reluctance, development would have been a little bit more, even-handed, and much of the problem that we see today would not have galvanized over time. And I do see that, these are very bad disparities, which also prepared the grounds for a deep sense of disappointment as well as insecurity that the tribals feel. Say, for example, in the run-up to these riots, remember that there was this advertised position in Regional Institute of Medical Science, where both C and D positions were advertised.
Right.
And when the actual recruitment happened, the reservation policy was flouted. And the result of which is that the matter was taken up by ATSUM, All Tribal Students Union Manipur. A tripartite agreement was reached between the state government as well as the ATSUM and the central government. But this was sought to be breached by some of these very majoritarian integrationist frontal Meiteis civil society organizations, which in effect deepened the sense of insecurity and powerlessness that they feel, because the whole reservation policy, for example, has been manipulated. Remember that the state follows a 100-point reservation roster system, in which this roster system is also pliable to being politically, machinated, monopolized inside. And there are extensive reports of manipulation of reservation roster system in such a way that the tribals are deliberately institutionally excluded from being accommodated, as well as given participational rights in the institutional space. And that also underpinned one of the major reasons why there is this deep-seated sense of distrust, as well as sense of lack of legitimacy of the state institution in Manipur, which I think is also equally as important in generating this wide-scale disenchantment with the state government today.
Okay. Very interesting, and thank you so much for giving us so much context into the issue. Now, if you could also help us give some historical perspectives, sir, because was this distrust, like you've just given us a few topical examples, was it always present, or was it at some point in history it started, and why did it start?
Yeah, if you look at closely, the historical context in which all this institutional development happens in Manipur, I think so far as I could see, the first institutional arrangement made to bridge this Hills-Valley divide, as it were, was in 1835. And remember that there was this unruly relations between the hill communities as well as the valley-based, kingdoms, as it were. And given that this unruly nature was sought to be regulated by calling upon the British officer to establish a semblance of institutional framework which would be powerful enough to regulate the ravaging tribes who in effect engaged in extensive hunting expedition. And remember that these hunting expeditions are not just acts of savagery. These are in effect a very deliberate, calculated attempt to zealously guard their territorial borders, as it were. And the tribals do not take easily, or they take it very seriously, any encroachment or intrusion in what they consider to be the traditional territorial boundaries, right? So whenever there is this extension of the state boundaries or attempt to cross or attempts to violate, those well-defined, traditional boundaries, you have these ravaging tribes who, in effect, hulled a series of headhunting expedition into the valley areas. So this was precisely the context in which the first institution was insurrected in 1835 in the form of political agency. Okay. And it is this historical institution which laid the part, dependent character of in 1891 when Manipur was taken over by the British, and in 1907 when the then political agent Lieutenant Colonel J. Shakespeare come up with his future scheme of administration for the hill areas. He envisaged, for example, a Durbar system in which the president is ex officio the king, the then king of Manipur, and the vice president of the Durbar, who is usually an Indian civil service officer, which means a British officer, is given the exclusive responsibility of taking in charge of the hill matters on the pretext of 2 or 3 grounds. One is on the pretext of ethno-cultural distinctiveness. Secondly, on the pretext of what is recorded in colonial ethnographies, quote unquote, as the cruel dealings that the valley kings had with the hill communities, and thirdly, to bring the administration closer to the hill people. So you have a kind of a very institutionalized political arrangement which seeks to accommodate the distinctive historical peculiarities of the hills and the valleys, and which in effect was reinforced when Manipur framed a constitution of its own before India's independence. And Manipur have now proudly claimed that it is probably the first state in the whole of South as well as Southeast Asia to transform into a constitutional democracy. It framed its constitution in July 1947, and wherein this historical institutional pedigree was sought to be institutionalized and deepened by coming up with Manipur Hill Areas Administrative Regulation of 1947, whereby not only matters pertaining to the hill areas, but also judicial matters are kept out of bounds of the Imphal Valley judicial system. And this is a system which was continued, as you would be aware, in 1955, when the Manipur Village Authorities Act was passed, in effect, which also gave a semblance of constitutional democracy by, in effect, transforming the nature of distinctive local administration in the hill areas. And come 1963, when the state got union territory status, there was another institutional arrangement called the Hill Area Standing Committee, which is a replica of the Hill Area Standing Committee in the then Assam state, right? And this is an arrangement which was inspired by the Scottish model, as it were.
Okay.
And the Scottish
Mr. Hasim, I'll come. All right, sir. Thank you so much, because you've given us a lot of perspective and lots of things to talk about. But unfortunately, we have limited time. I'll come back to you, sir. We also have with us Major General Sudhakar ji. General ji, you are from the services, and the defense forces form a very crucial. They have a very crucial stake in the northeastern states. Now, the first step by the Home Minister is that he took all the stakeholders together and said, okay, let's come to the dialogue table and let's talk about it. Now, a section of the people from Manipur feel it's a very belated step, and he's waited far too long to come to Manipur. But having said that, dialogue and negotiation becomes the #1 thing when there is violence, when there are riots taking place. As per you, and from a defense perspective, what do you feel is necessary now to bring peace to the region immediately?
Gaurav, thank you. It's a very relevant and pertinent question you are asking, but I must compliment the co-panelist for having covered the narrative in a very comprehensive manner. Rather, I would say he should have had the last say on the subject. He's left nothing for us to cover, but your question actually pertains to peace and development. I think the beginning has been made, and it's not going to be a very simple affair. like in the previous panel, previous to previous panel discussion, we have brought out that it's a very complex issue and it's going to take a long haul. So I would say the visit of the Home Minister, people may perceive or consider it to be 25 days late, but I take it as a military old leader, veteran, that the top leadership doesn't run into the conflict right at the breakout itself. He waits for the dust to settle down, for things to crystallize. For a complex issue as is unfolding in Manipur, it takes time for people like him, my previous co-panelist. The way he is brought out, there are far and few people who would have understood the subject in the same manner. He's given the historical perspective. He's given the contemporary scenario, how it is unfolding. He's done a research on the subject. He's also willy-nilly, giving out a roadmap of a suggested roadmap. So therefore, what I'm saying is that from the defense perspective, peace doesn't lie in political dialogue. It lies down below. We need to understand the very network, the constitution of the tribal community, their rising aspiration. To me, the problem is actually identification of the problem is the biggest problem in the world. As I understand, my previous co-panelist has covered the narrative beautifully, but let me just highlight the 4 or 5 issues coming to my mind. First and foremost is the land. The land issue is a critical issue in Manipur, 1. Number 2, there are too many tribes who are either in conflict with each other or there is a lack of understanding. Number 3, all the multiple stakeholders have not been taken into confidence. The factor of equality has not been put into effect on ground itself. Tall promises have been made, but nothing much has happened. I have been to the hill sector. I know for sure that this sector requires extensive development. A lot of work has gone in for sure for past 8-9 years. I must compliment the present dispensation, and even more has to go in for it. Fourth point I would like to say, there is a narcotic and the counterfeit and the illegal weapon factor which is coming into the state. This has to be factored in. And last but not the least is that the peace effort, our women organization in Manipur are best known. Take your mind back to 1904. Take your mind back to just prior to Second World War, 1937-39. The women, call it Manipur Women Organization, the Meiteis Women Organization, the Cookies Women Organization. Women are respected all over India, but particularly in Manipur, they are not only respected, they are heard. They have a very powerful, I would say, or connect with the society. I think that is going to become a turning point in Manipur if women organization is given due impetus, given due respect and direction. They will be able to turn things, ugly things out of hand and bring laurels and peace and harmony. And if you allow me, Gauri, one more point is that everything happening in Myanmar has got a direct bearing in Manipur. Okay. Whether it's orchestrated or China has got a hand or not, it is anybody's guess. But the military junta that we are engaging with, the Minister of External Affairs has to revisit the whole issue, calibrate our approach and tell them, here is the red line. If you do not stop these migrants coming from Myanmar to India, we have to sooner or later start the process of some kind of a visa being issued along the border, which does not have a grid like in Jammu and Kashmir. We need to have a kind of a census, people coming in, taking them into account, monitoring their activities and also their presence inside Manipur and those who are going out. I am very aware of the fact large number of these immigrants are settled in Mizoram and some of them in Delhi and few of them in Manipur. But they are playing a very important role, whether it is poppy cultivation, maybe the trigger of this incident, it is not the High Court order. It may have been something that took place in the hilly areas, which our friend is actually raising his hand. He may be able to throw some light on. So therefore, there are multiple factors, Gauri. We need to take all these aspects into view and consider the pros and cons, weigh out options, and the best option should be the one which is going to give us peace and harmony as a long-term perspective, for which we need to take a short-term view, a mid-term view, and a long-term view.
Okay.
Back to
all right, Professor, I'll come to you in a bit, but Subhrangshu is also on the broadcast with us. Subhrangshu, when you compare this with other states in the Northeast, and I don't mean to generalize here, but if we can draw some comparisons with other states, be it in issues of tribal rights, be it issues of land, be it inter-community conflicts, are there lessons from other parts of the Northeast which can be in fact used to find solutions in Manipur?
Gauri, I think firstly, let me address the Home Minister's visit issue. I believe that it's timely. He is accompanied by IB Chief Topon Deka, who is also from Assam. He is an expert in Northeastern insurgency issues. He is accompanied by Ajay Bhalla, the Home Secretary. He is also from Assam Meghalaya Cadre. So I think they hold substantial expertise in this area. And their visit would be substantial because they are talking with all the communities, which is the need of the hour. We need to bring all the communities together, cookies, Meiteis, everybody together to the talking table and sort out these issues. But at the end of the day, as you were talking about this, the lessons, these issues actually, as Sir has said, he has talked about Sanjeev Barua. Professor Sanjeev Barua has already said that all the issues in the Northeast actually stem back from the colonial period where this region was used as a resource frontier and a settlement frontier. So they come from these sort of anxieties about land, settlement, borders, identities. They're always ingrained in the identities of the Northeast. If you talk about lessons, if you look at Assam, we have same sort of anxieties between Bengalis and Assamese, between tribals, Boros, Dimasas, Karbis, Missings. Everyone is demanding their own states, own autonomy. So there are always these fissures that are emerging. And at the same time, the state and the civil society is trying to sort these out. If you look at Assam, these issues are really huge. And even today, they are huge. But the political leadership is trying to sort these out by reaching out to the communities, giving them autonomy in one way or the other, if not to the highest level, but also in a level that they might be, they might be liking it in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of protecting indigenous faith. These steps are being taken, which might allay their concerns. So these need to be taken by other states also. And majority-minority conflicts, of course, that has to be addressed. And also in this issue, we must remember that the dissentment against Mr. Biren Singh was going on even before this, issue. If you notice, there were MLAs going to Delhi to dislodge him, and now after the issue, there are many things that emerged. So these political issues are also there. But from Assam experience, I can say that if you bring all the communities together, currently the 6th schedule issue is going on in Assam. 6 communities are demanding the ST status, and the existing tribes are protesting it, and also the people who are not having the reservation, they are also protesting it. So how to sort this out? So the government didn't rush in. It is still talking to all the stakeholders. It is trying to see where a meeting ground can be achieved, where a reflective equilibrium can be achieved. Can we just go away from our stated position and find a solution, find an equilibrium where all things can be analyzed from a 360-degree viewpoint? Right. So I think these experiences can be useful in Manipur also. Of course, not in toto, but we can take lessons.
Absolutely. Okay. Professor Housing, before we wrap, so what is the solution now? Now, where do we begin? And if you could give us a chart to, let's say, mid-term to long-term solutions, not just immediate solutions, what can those be?
I think one of the immediate solutions should be that, since the state has collapsed, the state law and order machinery has collapsed and has been, completely in a mess to establish law and order. The more this is prolonged and the political dispensation is allowed to, continue in office, I think the ramification will be far more reaching in scale as well as intensity. And I suggest that as a short-term solution, President rules should be immediately imposed. Okay. Armed Force Special Force Act imposed in the valley areas because the hill areas have already had, Armed Force Special Force Act. That's first. Once there is a semblance of trust and legitimacy of central institutions as well as the state institutions, then serious dialogue should start. And this is also the time in which, as pointed out in the discussion today, and a retired Supreme Court of India under the direct monitorship of the Supreme Court should investigate into what really transpired in this whole large-scale violence, fix responsibility, and also start a kind of truth and reconciliation. And I think that is precisely where civil society groups as well as state, political leaders should first be willing to accept the truth about the central pivot around which this whole violence got unleashed. And that is precisely what I have argued in my earlier piece in the Hindu as well as in the Indian Express. It is essentially all out clear and simple, which is an institutionalized riot system. The complicity of the state is central to engendering this madness, which we have seen unabated till today. And until the state, in effect, stop from, its bullying strategies targeting communities as terrorists by not making a distinction between what are proscribed terrorist organizations. Remember that out of the 7 proscribed terrorist organizations under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, 6 are valley-based militant organization, and none of the hill tribal groups are proscribed till today. But the state government, the chief minister, has used in this criminally targeting hill communities who are parties to sue as if they're terrorist organizations. Such targeting, selective targeting of communities should stop forthwith. And I think until and unless this is stopped, and the state, in effect, upscale its offensive strike against hill communities and allow rector mobs as marionettes of the state's integrationist and majoritarian agenda, I don't see any settlement in the long run. And that is precisely where I think that at the core of this is the greed to control and monopolize, resource politics. You would see that since 2010, when the Jubilant Energy, the Netherlands-based oil exploratory agency based in Noida, in the Indian branch office, has signed a petroleum exploratory license with the government of India and extensively carried out exploration in the hill areas. It found that out of the 32 drilling oil fields, 17 of them are located in Churachandpur and Farzol. And remember, this is also the time in which you have a very aggressive push, not only of the state, but also of proscribed militant organizations who have sanctuaries on the Indo-Myanmar border side, from the Myanmar side. And I think that, talking about Chinese involvement makes a lot of good political optics. But if you really scratch below the surface, much of these drug as well as gun runners are valley-based proscribed terrorist organizations. And much of the major drug hole in the state, for example, recently, remember that T.H. Brinda, the retired, who was forced to retire from Manipur Police Service, in effect had tried to expose, the nexus of high-ranking, state bureaucratic officers as well as the state political leadership, and she was shunted out from her bureaucratic positions. And recently, you have the Uripok, a member of Legislative Assembly, writing to the Home Ministry, asking to investigate the 2019 major drug hold in New Delhi, in which 2 Meiteis valley-based individuals with full patronage and backing of influential cabinet ministers in the state are implicated. And and it makes a lot of good optics to put the blame squarely on the hill tribal communities as if they have conspired, because the state recent drive to evict them from plantations and so forth, in effect backfires, and it is a blowback and which generate violence. I think it's misplaced. Let us dig a bit deeper. And there is this complex nexus in which the major actors as well as funders of this poppy cultivation, drug as well as gun trade in Manipur and across the Indo-Myanmar border is in effect far more monopolized and controlled by valley-based proscribed terrorist organization with the full complicity or backing of the state government. So in that sense, I think let us not be misled by this false narrative and propaganda built around. And I think once we are mindful about that, fix the central issue, that is the greed of some of these very few economic as well as political cartels based in the valley to grab and monopolize resource politics in the hill areas. I don't think any long-term solution coming in the way.
All right, so extremely pertinent points. Thank you so much to all our panelists. The issue is extremely complex, so to speak, but we will continue to track the story here on NewsX.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.